Hey everyone, welcome to Our Small Footprint. My name is Nyssa, and if you're new here, we are a large family living off-grid in Australia. Today is Cowboy Candy canning day. Now, I've been saying I'm going to do this for weeks. I have just opened the very last jar off my shelf, so it's become kind of desperate. So I went through the freezer. So the whole point was we got the second freezer recently, and the whole point was that I could rearrange some of the stuff to get to it. So I had all these frozen chilies in the bottom, and they're what I'm going to use to make the Cowboy Candy this particular time. Now, these chilies are a mix of chilies. Some are from my garden, some are from a friend's garden, and some are from hamper excesses when we've had them, and I've frozen them. Now, I did pull the bags out, and I did notice that I've got a couple of bags that are pre-prepared only red ones, which obviously I had put aside for sweet chili sauce. Now I still have a few jars of that on the shelf, so I'm not going to make that today. I'm going to throw these red ones back into the freezer to use later on. But I might see when I weigh up what I've got left, I'll pull red ones aside if I need to pull some out to do it. So I normally do it in about 3 kilo lots, 3 kilos worth of chilies at a time in my batch sizes. So that's what I'm gonna, work on. So when I go through all my chilies that I have here, I'm going to, and I've got a lot, I'm going to see what weight we've got. And so like if we've got enough to do 2 to 6 kilos, it's fine. If we've only got enough for 3 and there's a bit excess, I'll put them back in the freezer for the moment. I'll see how I go. I make my Cowboy Candy a little bit differently to a lot of people because we use it a little bit differently. So some people with their Cowboy Candy like to have slices of jalapenos or chilies or whatever they're using because they like to put those slices on things. We're not really that way inclined. We love the flavor of the Cowboy Candy. I use it in all my meat marinades. We use it in our pasta sauces. We use it drizzled over all sorts of things, but we don't use the big chunks very often. So what I tend to do is I mince up my chilies in my Thermomix. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the tops off, shake a few seeds out, and then mince them up. Now, I did take the majority of the seeds out of the last batch, and it just wasn't quite as spicy as we like. So I'm gonna leave them in this time because it's such a range of chilies that we just don't know what origin, what breed, what species they are, and that sounds like the wrong word to use there. Brain fart. I have no idea. The word is what type of chili they are. So I don't know the heat levels of them or whether they've been cross-pollinated or anything like that. So we're going to keep it hotter rather than not, because with the whole point of the Cowboy Candy is that it's a sweet, spicy syrup. So the sugar overrides a lot of this. Now, we use a little bit less sugar than most recipes, but enough to make it safe for canning. And it is a high sugar recipe. It's a very high sugar recipe, but the point is that you only tend to use a couple of tablespoons, or like you might use half a jar of marinating 4 kilos of meat, but that's all a lot added, cooked off and things like that, or you just add a drizzle of a teaspoon in a pasta sauce and things like that. So that's how we work that. So let me get set up and I'll get a board and a knife and we'll get started on seeing how much chili we have here. All right, so I've got some scales here and the bag of chilies, and as I said, all I'm going to do is top them, chop them, and we're just going to go with that. Because they're frozen, they're not as easy to remove the seeds on. But as I said, the last batch was a little bit mild, and I think that was because of the type of chilies. I am going to pull those ones out because that was a nice, easy, and the one to split in half and just take that membrane and seeds out. So that works well. So we are removing some of them and just not others, and just double checking that the chilies all look nice and healthy. But yeah, because these wide ones are easy to pull that membrane and seed out, I'm gonna do that. So I'm just gonna go through and see how much weight one of these bowls is worth. And then we'll go from there, I think. Those ones are some nice looking seeds. See, I could keep some of these seeds if I wanted to, but I'm not entirely sure this year what I'm going to do in the way of garden. I've got a lot of stuff going on, and sometimes I focus on the garden because I really want the garden to work. And then when it doesn't, it just frustrates me to tears. All right, so I emptied a whole bag and half another one, and we've got a bowl here that's 1 kilo. So what we need is 3 of those, which should be perfectly fine. I probably can get a little bit more than that out of what we've got here. So that's what I'm going to work on. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to throw them in like this into the Thermomix to mince them up, because we just want them in little pieces, because I use them as marinades instead of use it as a drizzle. So we don't want the big chunks of chili. That's not the way we tend to eat it. And that's personal preference, but also once they're frozen, they don't slice up as nicely either, or have as nice a texture when you can them. So they're much better off being just a sort of a sauce, cowboy candy sauce, rather than chunks of chili. So that's what we're going to do. So now I'm going to have to make sure I give this hand an awfully good wash after doing this. I've got all the extra bits and pieces, and we're just gonna keep going. So if I've got my, let me just one sec. All right, so all I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go into manual mode and I'm gonna throw these in. Let's do half initially, probably. So we've got about 500 grams there, and then where did I put the lid? And we're just going to select speed 10 for sort of 5 seconds and see what it does. I actually stopped that after like a second and a half, because it already sounds like, because they're frozen, they're going to be breaking up pretty easy on those blades. And we've already got this. So by doing it this way, it means that we get some different textures in here too. So there is lots of minced stuff, but there is some bigger chunks as well. And part of that is by doing it when it's frozen. So I'm happy with that texture there. So I'm going to get a different bowl, and I'm going to tip this 500 grams of in there, and I'm just going to quickly have a sift through and make sure there's no really giant pieces in there. But no, it looks like all of the biggest sort of pieces are like this sort of size, which isn't too bad. I'll just pull a few of those bigger bits out because I can. Oh, we did end up with a tail of one, so there's a whole tail end of one there. Other than that, I'm pretty okay with the different textures. So all I'm going to do is add the other half and hit play again for a couple of seconds. So the sound changes when you can stop hearing it hitting the blades, and it's just sort of a constant sound. And you've got the same result. All right. So I'll put that aside for the moment. I'll double check any big pits can go back in this bowl that's going to be processed next. But in general, I'm pretty okay with most of that. So we've got a kilo there. We'll put that aside and we'll keep on going. So I'm going to do that again twice more, so that we got 3 kilos worth, and then I'll bring it back. All right, so all up, we've ended up with almost 4 kilos. I've got this big bowl here, I've got part of a bowl here, some still in the Thermomix, and a bit that I still need to blend, and it ends up being almost 4 kilos. But they were frozen, so there's some ice and water in that consistency as well, so I'm happy with that 4 kilos. I also double, triple, quadruple my brine, so there's far more vinegar in it than needed. So we'll go over that as we go through. Now I do have a bag full of ends and bits and pieces of seeds and some bits that are have a bit funny marks on them. I'm going to throw this in the freezer, and what I might do is on a nice sunny day, I'll dehydrate it all, and then I'll grind it up and I'll add it to the chicken food. You know, a teaspoon of this in their food or in their bedding areas is really good for mites and things like that. So that's what I'll probably do with that. So I'm just going to seal that up, and it's just all the odds and ends, and I'll dehydrate it and flake it. You can feed it to them like this, but my chickens are a little bit silly, and last time we gave them bits like this, one of the chickens overdid itself and injured itself. So because they have no heat sensors, so they can't feel the heat, but obviously it can still do some damage. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grind it up, use it as flakes. So that's going to go back in the freezer. Now, next sort of step is we're going to create the brine. Now, the thing with Cowboy Candy and the process of making it, normally we would mix up our brine and we get our brine to boiling, and then we place all our jalapenos or whatever you're using into the brine and bring it back to the boil for a few minutes, and then you take all your solids out and you bring the brine back to the boil again for a few minutes, and then you pour that over the solids. Now, the reason and the purpose of doing that is partly because we've got a small amount of brine to solids, because the idea of canning it as Cowboy Candy is that your jar is full of solids with a little bit of brine for it to float in, right? The other thing is that you want to keep the slices or the pieces of the jalapenos with a little bit of crunch, so you don't want to overcook them. So that's the purpose of, like, you know, putting them in liquid once it's already boiling, bring it back to the boil. It only boils for 4 minutes. It's enough to get the air and water out of the jalapenos. Then you're putting them in the jars and you're bringing the brine back up to the boil, which is also going to cook out any further air and water. For me, because I'm not doing chunks, the texture of the actual pieces is irrelevant. So I am going to measure all my brine ingredients into the pot and turn it on, but then I will probably just add all of this in and bring it all up to the boil at the same time. Now, the other thing is the ratios of brine to chilies, okay? So the average, let me find my notes. Okay, so the average ratio that you'll find on most recipes is around about 3 pounds or 1.4 kilos of chilies to about 2 cups of vinegar, and then the relevant 6 cups of sugar and things like that. That's a pretty average. Foodie for Family is one that I've used before to, you know, work out basic ratios, and the recipe there is very similar across the board, because the whole point is that you need your brine to be acidic enough to compensate for the lower acid chilies so that it's water bathable and shelf stable. So you have to stay within those, you know, sort of those guidelines, right, to make it work. Now, for me, I do about 3 kilos of chilies, so about double the standard recipe. And instead of having 2 cups of apple cider vinegar, so say 500 mils of apple cider vinegar, I use 2 litres, so 8 cups of, so about 4 times the brine amount. And the reason I do that is because we use the brine for a lot of things that we don't necessarily use the solids for. So if you're making Cowboy Candy and you're making it to eat the slices, you don't want excess brine, right? Makes sense. But we make Cowboy Candy for the brine. So keep that in mind. I'll put some ratios in the comments in the description of the video and some links and stuff. But for me, we're going with 3-ish kilos of jalapenos, chilies, whatever, though I've ended up with almost 4 kilos. But that's fine because I'm already 4 timesing the ratio of the brine. So we've got plenty of acid to compensate for the quantity of low acid ingredients, which is, there's a bit of garlic in it as well, but for the quantities that I'm using, it works. So as I said, I'll put a link to a couple of approved recipes in the bottom for you to have a look at, and I'll put the ratios of what I do, but I use it differently to a lot of people. So we use this in our mayo. It's one of our favorite things. We always have a jar going in the fridge to add to our mayo. Makes a spicy sweet mayo. It's lovely. The lemon pasta that I make, the all-in-one pasta dish with the egg yolks and stuff, we use a drizzle of this in that, and lots of other things, the pesto pasta. So this is how we make it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get all my quantities of everything into a pot on the stove so that I can get the brine started, and we'll get that sugar dissolved before we add in the solids. All right, now first up we're starting with our vinegar. Now I have apple cider vinegar. This is from Costco. I do not know what the percentage is on this one. I've never looked it up. You are supposed to use 5% vinegar for anything that you're going to water bath can, because that is what the acidity is based on. However, a lot of vinegars in Australia are only 4%. If you're making something that you're going to can and you're concerned about the level of the acidity of the vinegar, you can increase your vinegar by 25% and decrease your water by 25%. So like if you're making a pickle, then normally you would have like 50-50 water to vinegar, and instead you could have 75-25 of vinegar to water, and you'd end up with that same 5% ratio. As I've discussed, we're doing 4 times the brine to the quantity of low acid ingredients. So the fact that this may only be 4% really doesn't matter, because there is already 4 times 400% more vinegar in this recipe than there needs to be for the ratio of chilies. So we're going to start off with 2 litres of, probably could have got away with a slightly smaller pot actually, but I think the smaller one would have been a little bit too small once we add the sugar in that, because of course sugar ends up in as liquid. So we've got 2 litres of apple cider vinegar here, and to that we're going to add 6 kilos of sugar. Now that sounds like a lot, I know. But once this gets into all the little jars, you'll realize how far that stretches across this many. And the whole point is that it is a syrup. It is supposed to be a syrup. And again, this is 4 times the amount. Now you can easily reduce the sugar in this recipe, because the sugar is not important for the safety of canning. It is a flavor profile only. So feel free to reduce the sugar in it. I'm just using raw sugar because it's cheap and tasty, and I'm going to stick with the 6 because that's what's on my notes, and I make this in bulk in this ratio regularly, and obviously that's how I like it. It's one of those recipes that I feel a bit guilty about because of the amount of sugar in them, but as I said, we're using tiny amounts of it at a time, and this is a huge batch. So and I think I only make this size batch maybe once a year. I think that's all I need, because most of those chilies, actually some of the chilies were dated January of 2024, so 18 months old is when I froze them, which is probably when I last made it. So every 12 to 18 months I make this much, and it lasts us that entire time. I'm going to add some garlic powder and some celery salt. So let me grab my measuring spoons. I've got 2 tablespoons of celery salt on my list, and then I just need the garlic powder. And I've got, what have I got on my list? 5 tablespoons of garlic powder. Now, there's lots of optional ingredients with a lot of places that make this, a lot of recipes. Turmeric, which adds colour, and I think that was 5, it might have been 6, but as I said, big enough brine mix, it's not a big deal. Turmeric, which gives it a lovely colour. Some people add cayenne. I left all the seeds and the membranes in most of these chilies, so it should be plenty hot enough. I don't need any extra spice. There is, to a degree, you can add whatever you want here, so long as you don't overdo it with the quantity of brine. Again, we've got the high acid brine to the low acid veggies, so you just have to be aware of that as well. I'm going to bring this up to a simmer, get this sugar dissolved, and then I'll bring it back when I'm adding all the chilies. Alright, so this is mostly dissolved. As I said, I don't need to bring it to a boil before adding the chilies, because we're not concerned about the texture of the chilies. That is irrelevant the way we make it. If you want your chilies to be nice and firm, this needs to come to a boil before you add the chilies, and you only boil it for a few minutes with the chilies in it. The way that I do it, I'm going to throw everything in, I'm going to bring it to a boil until it's right, and then just can it. I use a slotted spoon rather than pulling all the solids out and then adding liquids. I just use a slotted spoon and we're all good. Super simple way of doing it, but it suits us. So all I'm going to start doing is making a mess, because, you know, that's what I'm good at. So I'm just going to start getting all these chilies in the first bowl. Then I've also got a smaller bowl, and I've still got a little bit left in the Thermomix as well. So now all I need to do is mix this through, and we're going to bring it up to a simmer and let it simmer for sort of 5 or 10 minutes. Boil, a rolling boil's good for 5 or 10 minutes, which will cook out a lot of the air, water, all that sort of thing. So might even let it go for 15-20 depending on how long it takes, just because of the frozen chilies. There's going to be some water in this, so the longer we let it boil, the more water is going to get kicked out of it. And then we will start the process of canning it. I need to pull my jars out and decide what I'm putting it in and things like that. And yeah, so that's the hard yards done. Obviously it's harder work if you want your chilies sliced a specific way, but because of the way I just dice them up, it's super easy to do it this way, and I don't mind the mixed colours, mixed chilies and all of that. So we're going to let this come up to a simmer. Now, one benefit of this size pot, be careful, it will boil over. Be very careful. Hot sugar boiling over, not fun. Alright, it started bubbling, but it's not quite at a full rolling boil, so we want to get it to a full rolling boil for at least a couple minutes just to cook all that out of it, and then we'll turn it down and let it simmer to get any of the air bubbles out as well. But we want it to get to a full rolling boil, so at the moment it's still just bubbling and simmering. We want to get it that little bit further. Alright, so we've got a rolling boil, so we're going to let this go for 5 minutes, but we're going to watch it so it doesn't boil over. And then I'm going to turn it back down to a simmer for probably 15 minutes while I eat some lunch, and then I'll come back and stick it in jars. Alright, so I've got 23 of these little square jars. I did have 24, one of them had a crack in it. I got these really cheap off Waihu a while ago, and they're just a good size for the Cowboy Candy. It doesn't matter that they're square because it's a pouring liquid. I don't like these for things that you want to scrape every last bit out of, but for the Cowboy Candy they work well. And then we do them in larger sizes as well. So this is good for having in the fridge for using like a teaspoon or two in a pasta dish or in mayo and stuff, but I tend to fill like 500ml jars as well, pint jar type sizes for use when I'm doing bulk meat marinating, things like that. So we'll fill these ones up first, we'll see how we go. Now, as per usual, funnels are an issue for me. This funnel is a wide mouth funnel and it goes around the outside of the jars, which means that the rims are going to get dirty, and this one's a narrow one and I don't think the chunks of Cowboy Candy will fit through it. I do have a plastic one that's slightly narrower and a metal one that's slightly narrower, and I of course cannot find either of those at the moment. So let's just see how we go. We'll try the narrow one first, but I don't think it'll feed through. I think it'll take far too long to, yeah, just too time consuming to do it that way. So I'm just going to have to deal with the wider mouth and clean up the jars really nice and well once I'm done. It's a bit of a messy job anyway. Cowboy Candy ends up getting sort of everywhere regardless, so we're just going to have to stick that over the top and pour it in. It's making one hell of a mess. So let me have a think, because look at the rim on that. That's going to cause a lot of extra time to clean up. All right, I'm figuring things to make it a little bit easier. So what I've got here is one of my mason jar lids with a big pouring spout on it. I think this is going to be my best bet. I'm a little frustrated because I can never seem to find stuff when I need it, and it drives me nuts, but that's part and parcel of not having a proper kitchen, isn't it? And this really limits my line of sight of the jars when I'm filling it, so it's not ideal, but it's going to save me time at the end, because cleaning those jars up with that other funnel would have just been really, really time consuming, because it's really sticky and you need to make sure it's all gone, otherwise the jars won't seal properly and then we forget failures, and then that just seems silly. So we're going to go along and fill them like this, which, as I said, not ideal. This one doesn't have a removable, the little, oh, no, it does. All right, that'll make life a bit easier. But yeah, just going to fill these up in, you know, the boganest way possible in my bogan outdoor kitchen. So I'll get all these filled and then I will bring back. Alright, so all these jars were washed in warm soapy water. They don't need to be sterilised because they're going to be canned for longer than 10 minutes. And then I filled them. Now I'm going to give them a really good thorough clean around the edges with the vinegar, just to make sure that I get all that Cowboy Candy off. Most of them are fine because I changed the method of... Oh, I grabbed the wrong lids. I thought these were these ones. Let me leave with me just a sec. So as per usual, nothing goes to plan in this household. It's now 4:30 in the afternoon. These jars I bought, they were really cheap. They were seconds. They were 40 cents each, these jars, and with the lids included. But the thing is that I didn't realize that they're 58 ml lids. So when I've used them previously, I've used the lids that came with them. This time I'm not using the lids, and I'm not reusing the ones that I used last time, because what I used them for last time was Cowboy Candy, and because of the acid content of the Cowboy Candy, the inside of the lids tend to go black. They tend to oxidize and pit, so I didn't keep the lids. They got tossed as a one-use lid. So I need to order some 58 ml lids, but that's going to be a week. So Sonnet washed for me some standard 250 ml ones. These ones are twist lid ones. I do have mason jar ones, but I pulled all the twist lid ones. And these ones take the 63 ml lids, which I already had pulled out. So now I have to decant all of these square jars into these ones before I can get them canned. And Sonnet's going to wash me some of the big jars as well, because I'm going to hit the end of my wanting to do anything. I'm going to fill all these ones that were washed, and then I'm going to put the rest in large jars because it's already late. So I'm going to decant these first. So smaller mouth openings, all I'm going to do is that we're going to have some wastage, and that's just going to be life, but I'm going to have to top each of these up because these are a 190 to 220 ml jar, and these are a 240 ml to 250 ml jar. So they're all going to need topping up slightly. And what I might do actually because all these jars are going to have a little bit of excess in them, is I might put a little lemon juice in these jars, transfer them 1 to 1 to 1, and we might freeze it because we regularly use lemon juice with the Cowboy Candy in pasta sauces and things like that. So I can just use a cube. That way might be the way to, because there's a lot of excess in these, and being the whole thing that I said about them being square jars is they're not easy to scrape out, which was fine for the use that we were doing them in. So anyway, I'm just going to get all of these transferred over, and then I'm going to top them up, and then I'll keep going. All right, so we've got these topped up. So now all I'm doing is, let me tilt you a bit, cleaning the rims nice and thoroughly with the vinegar, and then I've got the washed lids as well. They go on. Now, these are twist top jars, so the lids need to go on firmly, not like a ball mason where they go fingertip tight. We're going to use the whole heel of our hands to get these nice and firm. Let's start getting some of these out of the way, and we'll just keep on working through the jars. Same pattern, cleaning the rims, making sure any that have some Cowboy Candy on them are well and truly cleaned, because with that little bit of sugar can interfere with the the sealing of the lids. So we need to make sure that there is no dust, dirt or food in the way of them sealing, because you go to all this effort to fill the jars and can them. You don't want them to fail in the last section of processing. Looks like I missed topping this one up slightly. Maybe the one beside it too. We're taking these all the way up to the shoulder, half to 3/4 inch headspace. I like to take, when I have jars that narrow like this at the neck, I like to take them up to where they start narrowing. I find that that's the most efficient way to get them to seal properly. Very sticky. All right, so I'm just going to get all these done and the rest of these jars filled, and then the bigger jars that Sonnet cleaned for me as well. And I'll bring you back once I've got them all sorted. All right, so I got 24 of the 1 cup or 240 odd mil jars. And then I put 2 of these are 280 grams or say 300 mil. They're just pizza sauce jars. They all have the same lid style. So this is why these 63 mil lids are better than, and why I didn't, if I had have realized that these were 58, I probably wouldn't have bought them because I thought they were 63 like everything else. So most of your standard supermarket jars are 63 mil. So we've got pizza sauce jars. We have, I don't take the labels of anything. They come off when they canned. I'm not sure what that had in it, but it's a slightly different shape. Again, another slightly different shaped one. I think this was a honey jar, this one. Again, 63 ml lids. We've got, I know this is a honey jar, so we've got a 700 gram honey jar that again has a 63 ml lid. There is the square Legos pasta jars, 63 ml lids, and that might be another honey jar, same as that one, I'm not sure. But the labels, obviously it's been used a few times. But again, a 63 ml lid. So all of these different size jars all have the same size lids, which is why I buy a lot of these 63 ml lids. Because they fit on most things, and it's why I keep all my supermarket jars as well, even though we have huge amounts of jars that we don't really need at the moment. I have them so that, because I have lids that suit them. So this is what we've ended up with. Now I need to get the canners sorted and get these going. It's 10 to 5, mind you. All right, and what I'm going to do with these jars, I've got just some bottled lemon juice here. All I'm going to do is I'm going to put a couple of bits in the bottom. Now I don't have lids for these obviously, but what I'm going to do is just transfer it like that, get the most I can, adding a bit more liquid if need be, and I will use this lemon candy Cowboy Candy type juice here. I'll end up with a full jar of it probably, and I'll use it in the fridge to be the lemon juice / Cowboy Candy base to my mayos for the next however long. Being commercially bought lemon juice and the Cowboy Candy that is suitable for canning, it means that it'll last weeks in the fridge anyway, which is also why the bigger jars of Cowboy Candy are not such an issue either, because even though you open them and they sit in the fridge, they can sit in there for quite a long time before it becomes an issue, even open. So I'm just going to do that with all these till I've got a jar full, and we're going to start putting these in. So can you turn that on? It needs to be warm. So 3 quarts, 6 of those. Quart's about a litre. Well, the canning jars are in quarts. The water just needs to be warm because the jars are warm. Alright, so we're using the big buffalo canner, which means I can do 2, and I'm going to steam can it in the buffalo canner. So I've got first layer of the small jars, and then I'm going to put a rack on, and I'm going to double up the next layer. Right, and we've got the second layer on. So now I'm going to get a lid on, and we're going to steam can it. So we're going to let it do a steady stream of steam until the safety valve pops up, and then we'll start our timer for 15 minutes because we have some of these larger jars in here, so we'll do 15 minutes across the board. Right, so the jars are in the canner. We're steam canning it, so we're going to wait for a steady stream of steam, safety valve to pop, and then it will be 15 minutes because we've got those pint-sized jars in there as well as the little ones. I'll double check that. 15 I'm sure is fine, but I'll double check. And this is the Cowboy Candy lemon juice basically. So I'm going to use this to make mayo for the next week or so or whatever. Normally we would use Cowboy Candy and lemon juice. So we just got a mix of both of them sitting in there. And that was a good way to get some out of the bottom of those jars. Not all of it, but some. So this is going to go in the fridge. And now I'll bring you back when I pull them out of the canner and I'll finish off for you. But I'm going to make dinner because it's now 5:15. And that's it for today. So all those jars are out of the canner and sitting on the bench. Now they need to sit here for overnight. So the resting period after a jar comes out of a canner is important. It is part of the canning process, and the jars will finish sealing as the temperature drops. So they will sit out here on the bench until tomorrow. After that, I'll give the jars a wipe down if they need it, though it doesn't look like there was been any siphoning or anything in the bottom of the canner. And then they will go on the shelf, and we will have Cowboy Candy for the next 12 months.
6,000 years.
Theoretically, we'll see. I'm not entirely sure how long the last lot lasted, so, but it's a significant amount of Cowboy Candy. So I've been asked to do this video for a while, so it's done now, and I will see you guys on the next one.